the next passage I'm going to read, this takes place much later in the story, and Bets and Emmy have little spoiler, they eventually ditch Seth, so they have thankfully gotten rid of him at this point. And Emmy tells Bets as they're packing up for the morning, Emmy tells Bets that she needs to take a turn driving. They're driving this old Volkswagen camper, this old Volkswagen bus, and Emmy lets Bets know, now that Seth is out of the picture, I can't do all the driving. You gotta step up and drive. And Bets has never driven before. This is a lesson in driving. And I struggled a little bit when I was writing this with how to describe driving a standard shift automobile. I grew up driving one, and we don't have one now, but I'd like to think that if I got back in one, I'd be able to drive it. So I know how to do it. But how do you describe that? And just the subtleties of the clutch going in and the gas pedal going in. So I was struggling a little bit with that. And then also keeping in mind that, again, I'm thinking about readers who are in middle school or high school, a lot of them, and either kids that have never driven a car and have no experience to build on, or certainly haven't driven a standard shift car. When I talk in middle schools, I always ask, how many of you drive? And there's always one boy, usually a boy, that raises his hand, jokingly. If you ask that question in high school, and a lot more hands go up, but then they all go down when I say, well, how many drive a standard shift car? So I had that in mind as well, that I needed to describe something. It's easy to write about something that we think, well, people have had this experience, people know about this. It's easier to describe it, but to write about something and know that many readers are not going to have that experience. So I was conscious of that. At the same time, I didn't want this chapter to turn into what felt like a driving manual. So I wanted to give the reader the sense that this is complex, and this is frustrating for Bets to figure out. So I wanted to describe it in a way that you got that frustration, but at the same time, I didn't want to lose the story. I still wanted it to be, a character and dialogue and part of the plot that's moving the story along. So those were things that I was thinking about in this passage. So hopefully I did that. Emmy, I can't drive. I don't know how. I really didn't. At 16, I'd already had my hands and feet on the controls of an airplane as it cut smoothly through the air 1,000 feet above the ground. But I didn't know the first thing about driving a car. My parents had never shown me. Heck, I rarely even got to sit in the front seat. I was old enough, but there hadn't really been any reason for me to get my license. I could ride my bike anywhere I needed to go, and if I was going anywhere much further than school or home, I was probably going there with my parents anyway. I knew some kids at school who drove, and I knew lots more who wanted to, but I was happy to ride my bike or sit in the passenger seat. Emmy, really, you drive, okay? She smiled and sized me up, probably trying to figure out what I was afraid of. You can totally do this, Bets. It's fun, like riding your bike, just faster. I made a face. Okay, it's not like riding a bike, but it is fun. Her smile faded a little and her voice got more serious. Besides, with Seth gone, we need another driver. I can only drive so far each day. If we're taking turns, we'll get a lot further. I thought for a second that Emmy's reasoning was just a made-up excuse to persuade me, but I felt myself giving in, wanting to make sure that I was doing my fair share. But I still must have looked hesitant. Come on, try it, it'll be cool. I took the key from Emmy's finger and slumped into the driver's seat. Yeah, cool, I said with a sigh. I put my hands on the steering wheel and then realized I was still holding the key. I shifted my feet on the floor, trying to find the pedals, then tilted my head to one side so I could take a look, only to discover there were 3 pedals and only 2 feet. I fumbled with the key, trying to insert it one way and then the other, and then switching back to the first. When it still wouldn't fit, I finally gave up and turned toward Emmy with a frustrated growl. "What do I do?" I shouted in a voice that immediately sounded too big for the inside of the VW. I tried to turn the angry face I was wearing to one that pleaded for sympathy instead, and then apologized. I wasn't angry at Emmy after all, but I was frustrated. "It's cool, Bets, no worries. Okay, here, put your left foot down on that pedal. Yeah, all the way to the floor. Okay, the key, put it in this way." Emmy talked me through each step, pointing and gesturing and doing her best not to simply grab the key and start the VW for me. Somehow, it slid into the ignition smoothly with Emmy's coaching and turned easily once I had it in place. The VW's engine sputtered to life, and I jumped a little, pulling my hands off the steering wheel when I felt the vibrations in it. My foot hopped off the pedal and it popped back into the upward position with a thunk. Emmy coached again. "Okay, Bets, cool. You got the engine started. Now, foot back on that pedal. That's right. All right, one hand on the wheel, one hand on the shifter." There seemed to be more controls than I could cover. 3 pedals, a steering wheel that I felt compelled to hold tightly with both hands, and now the shifter? It stuck up from between the 2 front seats with a cryptic diagram of numbers and the letter R, far enough away that for a second I thought I'd ask Emmy to work it for me. I forced myself to pull my right hand off the wheel and reached out to move the shifter into the 1 position. Good. All right, now right foot on that pedal. No, not that one, the other one. I pushed the pedal to the floor like I had the first one, and I heard the engine scream in the back of the VW. I yanked my foot off and shot Emmy a look of angry surprise. "Be cool, Bets, it's okay. So, that's the gas. Don't push that one all the way to the floor. The middle one's the brake, and the one on the left, the one your other foot is on, that's the clutch." "The what?" "It helps you shift gears." "Well, why do I need to shift gears? Can't I just step on the gas?" Clearly, all the time I had spent in the back seat of my parents' car had taught me nothing about how a car actually worked. Emmy explained each pedal again and told me how I'd need to use both feet together to push in on the gas while slowly letting out the clutch. I tried what Emmy told me. At first, I was too fast pushing in the gas and too slow letting out the clutch. The engine revved again and we went nowhere. Then I had the opposite problem. The engine coughed and sputtered while the VW lurched forward once and then twice before the engine stalled and we came to a shuddering stop. At 16, I hadn't encountered a whole lot that I couldn't do. I was a good student and pretty much got all A's in my classes. I sometimes think adults all need to spend some time walking through a high school just to see everything kids are doing. Working on math problems, experimenting in science, tossing a musical instrument or the school play, write a story in English and research in history, all in one day, repeat, 5 days a week. We grow up and become adults and decide we can't do any of that stuff anymore. But for a few years at least, we feel like we can do everything, which sort of sets us up for embarrassment when we have to learn how to drive a car. I tried. Again and again, I alternated between revving the engine and stalling it, but each time I tried, I came a little closer to finding that place, right in the middle, where the engine had enough gas to move the VW forward. Finally, I found it. I felt it before it actually happened. One pedal pushed in, the other came up, and somewhere in between, the VW started moving, not jumping forward and then coughing to a stop, but rolling smoothly, like it was meant to do. As soon as it happened, I panicked. What do I do next? I had to steer and control the speed, and the VW was rolling onto the road where I also need to actually drive it. Paying attention to where I was going and what I was doing, for an instant, I wanted to remove my hands and feet from all the controls and simply give up. Instead, I shouted at Emmy, "What do I do? What do I do?" All right. I'm not sure about Emmy's abilities as a driving instructor, because she taught her how to use the gas pedal before the brake, but hopefully she's okay.